What's going on, guys? This is Jacob from Sunday Lifters. Today I'm going to be taking another sort of deep dive into a specific area of fitness. The thing that helped me choose this one, to be honest, is personal experience. I was literally having a conversation with a mate of mine about 2 weeks ago or something, explaining that I've been feeling proper shitty lately in the gym. Like, my weights aren't going up. I was like, I feel tired. Like this, loads of little things that I was noticing over like a sort of 2 week period. And then I said to my friend, I was like, I've heard about this thing like overtraining, the term overtraining. And I sort of haphazardly said to him, I've been overtraining. I mean, the volume I was doing was pretty flipping silly, to be honest. I've had to cut it right back. In fact, the thing that made me sort of take the break in the end was just being forced to. I had other things I had to do, like multiple days in a row, and I just missed the gym. And when I came back, I felt so much better. I figured basically if this had sort of happened to me, it's probably happened to other people. I struggled to distinguish whether I was like just slacking off and whether I was like, I feel shitty, but like I'm just not putting enough effort in, or whether it was actually that I was feeling fatigue and it was holding me back in my workout. So without further ado, let's get into it. So overtraining, what is it? Essentially, overtraining is where you're working way more than you're resting. Now, overtraining will have a negative impact on your sports performance, your cognitive performance, and it could take 2 to 3 weeks to get back to homeostasis or feeling like you're at a normal state again. So overtraining is something that, it literally is going to take you weeks to recover from. So with that in mind, if you recover quicker than 2 to 3 weeks, it's probably not that you're overtraining at all, but a thing called overreaching. It's very common actually for people to think they're overtraining when they're actually just overreaching, and that is exactly what I was doing. A few weeks back when I was speaking to my friend, I was overreaching because overtraining is extremely hard to do, right? Most of us simply just don't have it in us to get to the point where we're overtraining. Like, we're talking, in some cases, people working out or exercising 3 times a day, 7 days a week for weeks on end. Like, it takes you to a place where you're just destroyed. So what happens is we'll just, up the recovery. We'll take times off, we'll do deload, we'll get that recovery from nutrition or sleep. Now, this doesn't mean overtraining doesn't happen, it just means it's extremely rare. There's a lot of anecdotes out there where people have sort of explained, like I said in that example earlier, they're training insane amounts throughout the week and then they're forced to take time off just because they overtrain to the point where they're basically ill or get seriously injured. Or if they're lucky enough not to get ill or seriously injured, they take the time off because they have to. Basically, they're beaten to a pulp, and then they come back better, way better than before, having had to take that time off. Basically, we do have small amounts of scientific data that also sort of back up this idea. One of those scientific studies I've linked in the description below, so you can have a sort of deep delve into it, but I'm going to sum it up like a really basic overview. They took 15 young men who didn't have any experience training and they split them into 2 groups. They had a continuous training group, or a CTR group, and a retraining group, an RTR group. Now, basically, both groups did high intensity bench pressing training for 15 weeks. The continuous training group, the CTR group, had no breaks for the full 15 weeks. The retraining group, the RTR group, did the first 6 weeks exactly the same as the CTR group. They just took 3 weeks off and then they rejoined at week 10 and continued the program to week 15. To sum it up really simply, is one group did full 15 weeks, no breaks. The second group did 6 weeks, 3-week break, resumed at week 10 and then carried on to week 15 when the study ended. Now, what they found was at the end of the study, both groups had a very, very similar results in their 1 rep max and their muscle growth over the period. In other words, the CTR group did 3 weeks of extra work than the sort of RTR group, and they didn't see any real significant benefit from that. Could be that they were just overtraining, they were getting too much in, and you know, the people who took the break came back, were able to do the lifts, the exercises more efficiently, and therefore at the end of the 15 weeks, with or without the break, they had very similar results. That's probably what happened. If you're training for strength or hypertrophy and you're feeling a little tired, you're sort of feeling sluggish at the gym, you're not sort of seeing significant improvement, and you know, you just generally feel crappy while you're working out, it's more likely that you're overreaching, or you need to look at your sort of lifestyle and make some changes there, whether that be sort of diet, how much sleep you're getting, you know, the sort of you know, things that are going on in your home life, your work life. All of these things need to be checked. If you do get everything in your check and you're just not sure what is causing the fatigue, it's always recommended you see a medical professional about things like that. Go see your doctor, your GP, whatever, and get it checked out, get some professional advice. So it leads me on to sort of the next part of this, and sort of linked in very tightly to what we've already discussed, which is fatigue. Now, if you're a normal human being living your life and you're sort of training really hard, you know, training like you should, you are at some point going to experience fatigue. You might be watching this video because you are experiencing fatigue, or think you might be overreaching / overtraining right now. If you do think you might be experiencing fatigue, don't stress about it. It's totally normal. You'll find out later. Especially don't stress about it, because that'll just make it worse. People often end up getting fatigued because they refuse to sort of accept that it is fatigue they're feeling. They just sort of punish themselves and say, I'm just being lazy, I just need to work harder, I just need to like eat more or something. Like it's not just, they don't want to admit that it could be fatigue. Sports scientists basically developed a fairly accurate system of being able to, you know, spot fatigue and do something about it. And what they've done is they've sort of broken them down into indicators, and there's 3 different categories of indicators, which we're going to go into now. I found a video by a channel called Renaissance Periodization. I've actually linked the video down below. This guy called Dr. Mike Israetel, he sort of really breaks this down way better than I'm going to break. I'm going to sort of do a really basic overview of these fatigue indicators. He literally wrote the article with a guy called Dr. James Hoffman that I used to sort of formulate this video and what I was going to talk about and learn about these indicators. So, you know, what better way to learn the intricacies than actually check out the guy who wrote the article talk about it himself. Like I say, article and video will be linked in the description below if you want to check those out. So the 3 indicators are leading indicators, we have concurrent indicators, and we also have lagging indicators. They are the 3 categories of indicators you can use to spot fatigue. Leading indicator is an indication which says that fatigue is on its way. It's going to be coming, but you've got a bit of time to sort of do something about it, plan ahead to stop that fatigue sort of, you know, progressing basically. Second one, concurrent indicators are basically concurrent indicators are basically indicators that fatigue is high now and something really needs to be done ASAP to correct this. Number 3, lagging indicators are basically indicators to suggest that fatigue has been set in for quite some time. We're talking weeks now, and nothing's been done to correct it. Usually when people get to this point, they're at pretty bad risk of getting ill or injured. Probably not taking any notice of the leading indicators or the concurrent indicators, and that's led them to where they are now, which is basically having lagging indicators. So I'm going to really briefly run through each indicator in the categories just so you guys get an idea for what you should be looking out for if you are possibly experiencing a bit of fatigue right now. So nutrition, previous day or the day's nutrition. Have your macronutrients been where they are normally? Are you eating as much as you do normally? Are you eating as, you know, a good a diet? Have you fell off the wagon? You're eating sort of crappy, high calorie foods and not getting your macros in, not keeping on top of the nutrition. That's going to lead you to experience fatigue a lot faster. Stress, we mentioned this earlier, you know, what's your home life like? What's your work life like? You know, if you're experiencing high levels of stress, that is going to fatigue you. Volume and intensity. So if last week when you were training you went really fucking hard, you went at it, like you've trained like you never have before, And then this week you basically can't get anywhere near what you were doing, whether that be volume or intensity. It's so likely you're going to be fatigued, especially if you went proper overboard on your last sessions. You need to use this as a sign it's time to sort of back off a little bit and maybe take a deload. This is why it's like always best to do your really heavy lifting or your proper your max volume for your training at the end of a mesocycle or just before a deload week. Coordination and learning proficiency. The easiest way to spot this would be in sports. If you're having trouble doing tasks you normally find very easy, it's getting a bit sloppy, or you're just not able to sort of learn tasks as adequately or as quickly as you think you normally can, that might be a sign that fatigue's starting to set in as well. Your neurological systems and your problem solving are probably going to get affected. And finally, the last leading indicator is jump height. The qualities of the nervous system that sort of govern speed and power are sort of one of the earliest systems that get affected when fatigue does start to set in. A great way of measuring that is something sort of that requires a lot of power, a lot of exertion in one movement, and you can actually use your height if you're taking jump measurements regularly, you can actually use your height to measure whether you're fatigued. If you're consistently jumping lower than you could like the week before, could be that fatigue is starting to set in. So moving on to concurrent indicators. These are ones that mean fatigue is high right now, it's time to do something. A loss in velocity will come before a loss in strength, whether that be a loss in speed when you're sprinting, punching, kicking, lifting a bar above your head, you know what I mean? That will get affected before strength, so keep an eye out for that. The next one is bar weight feeling, or your perception of it. Essentially, if the normal weights you're lifting feel heavier than usual, it might be time to take a deload or a bit of a break. Reps per set versus capability relative to your performance. What that essentially means is, does the same effort of performance feel harder relative to prior sessions? Could be fatigue. For example, if you did a 70 kg bench press the week before for 8 reps, and then this week you tried to do 75 kg bench for 6 reps, which theoretically should be able to do, but you're only hitting 4 or even 2, need a bit of time off it. You're hitting 4, you're hitting 2. It might be time to take a bit of a break. Grip strength, so force production is lowered when we are fatigued. Testing grip strength is a really good way of sort of measuring force production without actually fatiguing you more. You can get these little kits that basically measure it for you. It's called a hand grip dynamometer. I've actually linked one in the description below. You can buy them reasonably cheap. I mean, it's like 40 quid for a cheap one, which is the one I've linked off Amazon, so you've got to decide whether you think it's worth it or not. So now we move on to the third set of indicators, lagging indicators. These are the ones where you pretty much need to do something about it yesterday. Heart rate variables, so HRV is the amount of variation in between pulses of each heartbeat. As we get more fatigue, HRV actually gets steadier and sort of has less variation. So if you're monitoring that over weeks, you can notice it that way. The morning resting heart rate, which is MRHR for short, that's going to increase, if you're measuring it every morning, it increases over time, could be another sign. RHR, which is recovery heart rate, that's something you measure, generally speaking, after people do exercise. So if you're taking a reading 30 minutes after, I don't know, every cardio session you do, and you notice that goes up from one week to the next, instead of when your heart rate being at 60, it's 70, it's sitting, again, it could be a sign of a prolonged state of fatigue. Your desire to train, if you live and breathe your training and you don't miss it for shit, it's really hard for you to if you have to miss a session, you feel crap about it, and then all of a sudden from one week to the next you're like, I don't want to go training. Notice that that's not normal. Like if this is your life, you don't get like that. If you can go to the gym and you can do your training, or you just do your training, whatever it is you're training for, you will not miss it. You live and breathe it. Mood disturbances. So prolonged levels of fatigue is going to affect your mood. It's like if you're not enjoying hobbies, things you normally do, you know, you're underperforming at work, you don't enjoy things like having sex anymore, this is probably a sign you've been in a state of like prolonged fatigue. The next one is appetite suppression. Believe it or not, if you've been in a state of prolonged fatigue, your appetite's actually going to go down. If you're like not enjoying food, you don't even want to think of food, or you're just like barely eating anything, could be another sign. Sleep disturbances. The longer you're in a sort of prolonged fatigue state, that is going to affect your sleep. It's going to affect it in one of two, well, possibly both, but certainly two ways in particular. One, it's going to actually make it harder for you to get to sleep, and two, when you do get to sleep, it's going to be less quality sleep. Even if you're getting the hours in, you know, you might be waking up multiple times throughout the night. Illness, you know, if you ignore all the other signs that you've been in a state of prolonged fatigue, one or two things is usually going to end up happening. You're either going to get ill from it, or you're going to sort of get injured from it, which is the next one. Injury, wear and tear. If you keep pushing yourself when you're in sort of a fatigued state, you're either going to, you know, you're going to get sort of joint pains, like your knees, your elbows, whatever it may be. You might end up tearing a muscle, maybe like a, you know, a pec or a bicep or whatever it may be. It's not going to be good. And finally, for those of you who compete or take your sort of training really seriously, you know, you're a competitive athlete or bodybuilder or whatever it may be, the final thing you're going to notice, and the sort of final lagging indicator, would be turn up on your big day and you absolutely fucking flop. You just like totally don't perform. You've ignored all the signs. You got to your big day, you thought you could do it anyway, and you will pay the price. All that was basically for nothing. But on the bright side, you probably will learn a very valuable lesson, and you'll be better for it when you do your next competition. So, you know, it's not all bad, but please try not to get to that point. If you haven't already, you could get injured, you could get seriously ill. So in conclusion, if you are exhibiting sort of multiple signs of fatigue, and let me emphasize multiple, when you're taking a sort of sample size of just yourself to sort of measure whether you got fatigue or not, just exhibiting one of any of those indicators is probably not quite enough to go on, but multiple signs is definitely enough for you to sort of, like I say, take a bit of a break, take a deload, and you will probably come back much better than before. Use these indicators to spot whether it is fatigue that you're feeling, and you know, if it persists even though you're sort of dialing in the diet, the lifestyle, you know, get medical attention, see a doctor about it and tell them. If you think you're overtraining, you're probably not, you're just overreaching. Take a bit, again, same applies, take a bit of a break, take a deload week and come back to it. You'll be surprised how much better off you will be. Being aware of the difference between sort of overtraining and overreaching, it's going to help you spot where those little adjustments may need to be made to your lifestyle, your training, your sort of recovery, and your general health, to make sure you're getting optimal results from your training programs, and you're not at risk of injuring yourself and getting ill and potentially being out for months. Overreaching and getting fatigued are absolutely inevitable. Just don't worry about it. Spot them early. Get the adequate recovery time you need to stop them from becoming sort of more serious problems and seriously affecting your training programs. In that anecdote I told at the start, I was forced to take a couple of days off, and then guess what? I came back and I hit, in that week that I came back, got a new bench press PR, and I got a new 1 rep max on the deadlift. So, you know, happy days. I'd definitely say, if you're feeling crappy when you're training right now, try some of these things, spot the fatigue, make some little adjustments, and you'll be fine. Thanks again for tuning in. If you stuck with this to the end, guys, really appreciate it. Make sure you follow me on Instagram. It's at Sunday Lifters. If you want to hit me up for training or meal plans / coaching, you can email me at sundaylifters@gmail.com. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you drop this a like, drop it a comment if you sort of agree or disagree. Helps with the algorithms. Subscribe, hit that bell icon, and I will see you next time. Cheers, guys.